Early life. Henry Every was born on August 20, 1659 in the village of Newton Ferrers in Devon, England. According to parish records, he was the son of John Every and his wife Anne. The Every family was well known at the time, and Henry was most likely a kinsman of Wycroft Castle. Scholars believe that Henry was a sailor in his youth, and there are accounts of him serving on multiple Royal Navy ships. It's very likely that he was amongst those aboard the English fleet when they bombarded Algiers in 1671. Some think he was also a captain of a logwood freighter that was in the Bay of Campeche. However, those stories originated from Van Bruck's fictional memoir. It's been confirmed that during the outbreak of the 9 Years' War that occurred from 1688 and 1697 between England and its allies and King Louis XIV of France, Henry, in his 30s, worked as a midshipman on the HMS Rupert under the command of Sir Francis Wheeler. According to the ship's naval records, Henry spent little of his wages on extras such as tobacco and regularly consigned his pay to his family. In the year 1689, aboard the same ship, he helped to capture a large French convoy off the coast of Brest, France. Due to this victory, Henry had the opportunity to better his financial status and was promoted to master's mate. He was the youngest to be appointed to this position. He did so well in his role that in 1690 he was asked to join Captain Wheeler on his new ship called the HMS Albemarle. It's likely that he also participated in the Battle of Beachy Head, although this fight ended badly for the English, and Henry was discharged from the Royal Navy in late August that same year. Don't feel too bad for the man though, because in 1691 Henry became involved in the Atlantic slave trade. He then helped to transport the enslaved Africans from West Africa to the Americas under command from the Royal Governor of Bermuda, Isaac Richier. Henry operated mainly as a slave trader along the Guinea coast. Douglas Botting, an English historian, claimed that Henry was much more devious than many other practitioners of the sordid craft. Henry's activities started to make other slave traders at the time take notice of him. A Welsh slave trader known as Captain Thomas Phillips, employed by the Royal African Company, wrote about Henry in his journal. He detailed that the cynical actions of the man made the slaves from this coast more shy than usual, implying that he most likely played harsh tricks on them that caused them to feel more defeated than usual. It was during this time that Henry began to be known under his alias Long Ben, and they even thought his fake name was Every. He seemed to want his true identity to be a mystery. During his time as a slave trader, he was known to lure victims to his ship by waving flags of friendly colors. Then, once they were on board, he would capture them and chain them in his ship's hold amongst their other captives. Although we have documents that speak of Henry during these years, this part of his life was largely undocumented. Before we get into what made Henry Every king of the pirates, can you think of any other famous pirates? Tell us in the comments and hit subscribe while you're at it. Mutiny. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty. A wealthy merchant by the name of Sir James Houblon was hoping to reinvigorate the declining English economy by assembling an ambitious venture known as the Spanish Expedition Shipping in the spring of 1693. This venture would include 4 warships: the Dove, the Pink Seventh Son, Charles II, and James. Their main mission was to sail to the Spanish West Indies in order to conduct trade, recover treasure from the wrecked galleons, plunder the French possessions in the area, as well as supply the Spanish with arms. The sailors that participated in this venture were promised significant payment by investors and a guaranteed monthly wage paid out every 6 months. Naturally, Henry wanted to be a part of this. Henry was appointed as the first mate due to his experience in the Royal Navy. All 4 of the convoy ships were commanded by Admiral Sir Don Arturo O'Byrne, who was an Irish nobleman and had previously served in the Spanish Navy Marines. Right off the bat, things were going wrong with the mission. John Strong, who had been appointed as the flag captain, mysteriously died while the ship was still in port. But as they say in show business, the show must go on, and he was consequently replaced by Captain Charles Gibson. This, however, would not be the only tragedy that would occur. In August of 1693, the warships were traveling down the River Thames on their way to Spain's northern city of Corunna. This journey typically only took about 2 weeks. However, the ships did not make it to their destination until 5 months later. Even more bad luck followed because when they finally arrived at the port, their necessary legal documents failed to make it from Madrid. The ship was forced to wait until the proper paperwork arrived, and months went by without any sign of the documents. They had no money to send back home to their families, and the crew began to feel restless. The sailors requested payment from their captain, but were denied because if they had money, they would no longer be tied to the ship and could leave whenever they wanted. The men on board these ships began to think they had been sold as slaves to the Spanish. As the fleet of ships were finally preparing to leave Corunna on May 1, 1694, the men demanded their 6-month pay or else they would go on strike. Houblon, the main investor of the expedition, ultimately refused, and seeing the severity of the situation, Admiral O'Byrne wrote to England asking for the money. But this action would come far too late. Many of the sailors got into a heated argument with O'Beirne on May 6th, and it was around this time that a plan to mutiny was conceived. Henry Every began to recruit other members of the crew. There were witness accounts of him going up and down, ship by ship, to persuade men to follow him. He promised them that if they followed him, he could lead them where they would get all the money they would need. Henry had a lot of experience, and the men trusted him because he came from a lower social rank, and they felt that he would keep their best interest at heart. He won over the crew, and his plans to mutiny were underway. On May 7, 1694, while O'Beirne was sleeping, the men took their opportunity. That night, Henry and the 25 other men that had joined him rushed onto the ship Charles II and ambushed the crew on board. At the time, Captain Gibson was bedridden, and so there was miraculously no bloodshed at all. Extra crew members from the ship James pulled up along the vessel Henry had captured and recited the password they had agreed upon. "Is the drunken boatswain on board?" They then climbed on board and joined in on the mutiny. The confused captain of the ship James, obviously not understanding that Henry was leading the mutiny, called out to him and informed him that the men were deserting. The calm and collected Henry replied softly that he knew perfectly well what was happening. Now in control of Charles II, James began to fire at them, which promptly alerted the Spanish night watch. In order to get away without consequence, Henry Every was forced to make a run for it out onto the open sea, quickly disappearing into the dark of night. King of the Pirates. When Henry and his crew had sailed far enough away to be safe, he offered anyone on board that had not yet joined him one last chance to change their minds. He even went as far as to tell Captain Gibson that he could command the ship if he would agree to join their cause. However, he declined the proposal and was given a small boat to get him back to shore along with a few other sailors who did not want to join Henry. The only passenger who was not given the choice to leave was the ship's surgeon, because the services he could provide were far too important to lose. All of those men that were left on board Charles II unanimously elected Henry as the ship's captain. Surprisingly, the man handled the whole ordeal with a decent amount of generosity, which indicated that his motives were not just mere adventure. It wasn't hard for Henry to convince the crew to sail as pirates to the Indian Ocean. After all, their original mission was very similar to piracy, and the new captain was well known for his powers of persuasion. It's believed that he may have used Thomas Tew, a well-known pirate at the time, as an example of the riches they could receive. Tew had recently plundered a large ganja dhow in the Red Sea and had acquired treasure totaling just over 15 million euros as of 2021 in silver and gold alone. This story would have been quite motivating to the crew, and they were eager to set course for the Cape of Good Hope. Soon after he took over the ship, Henry renamed the vessel the Fancy. This name reflected the crew's newfound hope as well as the quality of the ship. It didn't take long for the men to commit their very first piracy. 3 English merchantmen from Barbados were sailing along the islands of Cape Verde when they were caught off guard by Henry's men. They robbed these 3 ships of their provisions and supplies. It's said that 9 men from these ships were convinced to join Henry's crew, and in total he then had 94 pirates at his command. They sailed to the Guinea coast, and Henry persuaded a local chieftain to board Fancy after telling him they were interested in trade. His band of pirates then forcibly stripped the chieftain and his men of their wealth, taking it for themselves. He even went as far as to keep these men as slaves after taking all of their riches. Now that Henry had come into some money, he dropped his anchor in Bioko along the African coastline in order to upgrade his ship. Fancy was raised and careened. The superstructure was cut away in order to greatly improve the ship's speed. These modifications made it one of the fastest vessels in the Atlantic Ocean. Throughout the next couple of years, Henry and his crew continued to pillage passing ships as they made their way to the Indian Ocean. Every vessel that they looted was accompanied by more men that wanted to join in on their cause. By 1695, their numbers had grown to about 150 pirates in total. Their success promptly gained the attention of the East India Company, who had giant powerful ships at their disposal and were the only real threat Fancy faced while in the Indian Ocean. Henry and his army of pirates then set sail for the volcanic island called Perim in mid-1695. Their plan was to lie and wait for an Indian fleet that would be passing through the area. This fleet of ships was easily the most profitable prize in Asia, maybe even the entire world. In order to pull off the massive heist, Henry joined 5 other pirate captains, including Thomas Tew. And although Tew had the most experience, Henry was ultimately elected as the admiral of the entire pirate flotilla. With all of these pirates together, he was now in charge of over 440 men, who were all now waiting for the Indian fleet to pass. Some of the other pirate captains' ships were too slow to keep up with Fancy, and they were left behind when they heard news that the fleet had managed to elude them and were now being seen in the Straits of Surat. A high-speed chase quickly ensued between the pirates and this Indian fleet. When they finally caught up with them in open waters, a battle of massive proportions began. The pirates boarded the fleet's ships, and a hand-to-hand battle began, lasting roughly 2 to 3 hours. There were plenty of casualties on both sides. However, in the end, Henry and his crew arose victorious, making off with a huge amount of treasure, roughly $42.4 million today. This attack by Henry threatened the existence of English trade in India when the stories of the pirates quickly spread, and so a manhunt for the pirate crew was coordinated by the Board of Trade. Parliament was offering €500, $270,000 today for Henry Every's head in 1696, and because of this, every bounty hunter and adventurer in the English-speaking world was on the lookout for him. He managed to disguise himself as a slave trader and set sail for the Bahamas where he could buy protection. When he arrived at the capital city of Nassau, he bribed a military officer for safe passage, and it was then that his crew split up. Henry himself disappeared in June 1696 and was never heard from again. Some theories say he died in poverty, but it could just be that Henry Every got away with all of his crimes and was able to spend the rest of his days enjoying his vast stolen fortune. Whatever the case may be, Henry became known to many as the King of Pirates. Do you think that you would have what it takes to be a pirate? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time for another amazing video right here on American Eye.